And let's face it, most interview processes are awful, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I remember going through interviews and, before I worked at Disney, and, you're uncomfortable, you're nervous, all of those things. When you can turn that typical interview process on its head, you become a beacon of light to potential employees in your operation. And just to support what you're saying, that's one of the things that if you go to the casting center at Disney World, the first thing you do after being greeted and all of those things is you go in and you watch a video doing what you just talked about, talking about this is what it means to work here. And what they found is about 15% of the people screen themselves out.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Power Hour, Optometry's longest running show. We've got a great episode for you today. I'm your host, Eugene Schatsman. Thank you for tuning in. The season's already been consistently setting listenership records, and I really encourage you to subscribe on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. So today, I invited a customer experience legend to join me on the show. Dennis Snow worked at Disney for over 2 decades. He worked on the front lines. He worked on operational leadership. He was in leadership at the Disney Institute and was also one of the top-ranked leaders across the entire organization. After he left Disney, Dennis started teaching, he started training, and the focus of his training, you might have guessed it, it's customer experience. So today, we get pretty deep into some of the tangible how-tos from Dennis's methodology, and we adapted to optometry. We talk about creating an incredible experience. You'll have to listen to the episode, but one of my favorite insights is how absolutely everything speaks, either positively or negatively about your practice. So the details are so critical. But Dennis is just a wealth of knowledge. We talk about how to adapt the patient journey, how to motivate your team to actually create an experience, and how to involve them in crafting what that experience should really be. And we talk a lot about staffing, hiring, all with the mindset of competing on service, not price. But to compete on service, you really do need an experience that's hard to match, and that's what the show's about. Before we get into the show, quick reminder, my goal as your show host is to help you find untapped potential in your practice. I'm doing this to be a resource for you, so if you're listening today, I want to hear from you. Send me a note with your thoughts, ideas, what you'd like me to cover, what you'd like to learn from the show, or really, if you just have any questions, you can do that directly at eugeneschatsman.com or through the Power Practice website. Either way, I'm here to support you, and I want to hear from you. So now, let's jump into today's show. All right, Dennis Snow, welcome to the Power Hour. So glad to have you here.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be on the show.
So Dennis, you and I met at one of the first conventions after COVID. I think it was actually Vision Expo East right after COVID. It was a really strange show, but one of the highlights, it was strange. But one of the highlights of that show was, for me, attending your keynote that you gave to a pretty large group of optometrists, and we were all semi-socially distanced and wearing our masks. But I think the overarching sentiment was that people were extremely impressed with what you had shared. So I'm excited to have you on the show. I think it would be relevant for people to hear a little bit of your background and your experience working for Disney for over 2 decades, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly 2 decades, as a matter of fact. Yeah, I was on a break from college up in Vermont, and was looking for a summer job. And my dad said, "You loved Disney World when you were a kid. Why don't you go down and try and get a job at Disney World?" So I came down to Florida, got a job at Disney that I thought was going to be a 3-month job, and it turned into a 20-year career, which is a very common story. If you ask any of the management at Disney, they'll tell you pretty much the identical story. But I actually started out working on the rides. There's a ride, it's not even there anymore, called 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, which was a simulated submarine ride. It's still the best job I ever had. But that's what I started doing, and then got into management and managed various operating areas around the company. One of the things that I love doing is I went to the Disney University, and that's where Disney does all the training for new cast members and management training. And then, fortunately for me, they spun off a division called the Disney Institute, where companies would come down and benchmark with us. And I just fell in love with that. And I did that for many years and decided, I've always wanted to have my own company. I hit that 20-year mark and thought I'm going to go out on my own. So what I've been doing for the last 25 years now is what you saw me do. I speak at a lot of conferences and do training, consulting. I've written a couple of books and so forth. So it's been an amazing career that really its foundation lies in my Disney experience.
Yeah, and I think it's pretty obvious that the topic of our conversation today is around competing on service,
Right.
and I'm going to have you get into that. And but really, again, maybe you can bridge the gap a little bit, since none of our listeners operate a theme park, and they're all either
There may be
business
days
owners.
that they feel like they do.
Yeah, maybe sometimes they do. But help me bridge the gap and tell me why the conversation we're about to have is so relevant to everybody
Right.
who works in or is an owner of an optometry practice.
Well, it's a good question. I've had a chance to work with optometry practices and conferences like you saw, and I find that there's a lot of similarities. The number one thing being that products and services are more and more commoditized every day, right? You think about what your viewers do. People have a lot of choices, and there's only going to be more choices as time goes along. So the quality of the product, the quality of the exam, and all of those things, vitally important. But so is the quality of the experience. And what made a difference at Disney, what was the key differentiator, was we always said, we're not selling rides, because you can get rides anywhere. Wherever your viewers live, my guess is there's an amusement park somewhere close by.
Yeah.
And so certainly the rides and shows have got to be great, but the thing that keeps people coming back to Disney year after year after year is the quality of their overall experience. So while, yes, it's not a theme park, people are still coming to your place. They're interacting with your people. They're making decisions based on the quality of what's happening around them. There's a retail component of it. Nobody's ever going to say Disney's a nonprofit organization, right? There's a retail component to it. So at first glance, yeah, what's the connection there? But you start going a little deeper, and there really are a lot of connections.
Yeah. So, and you talk about this experience, and I know that you have a book. And in that book, you talk a lot about creating the ultimate experience for, in our case, will be patients.
Right.
So talk a little bit more about the kinds of things that we should get into when we're thinking about creating a great experience.
Yeah, well, that word experience is critical. And so one of the things that I think you can do right away, that a team can sit down and have this discussion in the next team meeting, is in doing what we do. Whether it's the reception part of it, whether it's the exam part of it, the pre-exam, the retail part of it, what's the difference between doing what we do with a task mentality and doing what we do with an experience mentality? And the beauty of just asking that simple question is that people start coming up with what that means. Well, in a task, we check them in. In an experience, we greet them with a warm greeting. We welcome them. If we remember who they are, we use their name. The eye doctor that I go to, the receptionist always uses my name, which I think is great. If you're sitting in the waiting area for maybe longer than it might be, the receptionist or somebody comes over and says, "Apologize for the wait. Can I get you a cup of coffee?" Whatever. It takes it away from the task approach of checking someone in to making an experience. And you can look at that at every step of the interaction. But the point that I think is important is to get our people involved in having those discussions, because people don't argue with their own data. If you get them okay, these are things that we could be doing.
So meaning even just kind of transforming simply the word experience is a helpful transformative factor in understanding that we're not just here to get through the day. We're here to create something for someone, which in your definition, experience is something that we all understand. We all understand that this is that we don't want to have a bad experience. Experience is good.
Right. We want the experience to be good. Oh, we remember the bad experiences too, but yeah, we want the good ones. An example from my days working on the rides at Disney. For example, the submarines held 40 people. So one of the positions was the counter. You literally would count 40 people that were waiting in line as they boarded the subs. So you can imagine that could be very robotic. That could be very mechanical in doing that, because you're literally counting people. So the things that we used to do and that we encouraged people to do is, if somebody has something on their T-shirt, a Mickey Mouse on their T-shirts, hey, I see you're a Mickey fan, you're still counting them. One of the things I used to love to do when a child would walk by with their Mickey Mouse ears, they always got their name stitched on the back of them. And they would walk by and say, hey, Bobby, how are you? And it would just freak the kid out. How did he know my name? But the parents know exactly what you did. And it was just that little personal touch, while you're still counting people, that turned it from a task into an experience. And so
perfect.
that's the mentality, of thinking, how do we take it that, yes, every job has its tasks, but how do we take it that next level?
That's a great example. And I love what you're saying, because every single thing that we do that could be mechanical inside of an office, even, going through the pre-testing.
Yeah.
How do you make the pre-testing where, I think we sometimes refer to folks as, they're head pushers, right? They're just literally pushing the head into the machine, Dennis, and then they go into the next machine. And sometimes there's a little bit of a script, and we kind of say a few things about, this is the thing that looks at the back of your eye, and even then you can take that several steps further.
Yeah, it's, part of it is the why behind it. Here's what this machine does. This is an awesome machine. It's because it tells us all this information. That's okay. Wow, that's kind of cool that it does that. And just having the conversation as you're going through those steps.
And I once had a client who we worked with, and we were helping them figure out what's unique about their business. And it was interesting because they said, well, we're sort of like everybody else. We have some good technology. We have we have good doctors. We do a good job. But we're kind of like everybody else. And I said, okay, well, what are the machines that you have in your pre-testing? They said they had 3 machines, right? And I said, okay, and how many people typically use all of the machines? I said, well, that's actually one of our rules, is the doctor requires you to go through all of the technology during the exam, because the doctor wants to have the most amount of information, the most complete information. And I said, oh, okay, well, how many other offices in your state do you think have all 3 of those machines? And just in the in the pre-testing? And I said, probably less than 5. I mean, a lot of people have an OCT, but not that many. And so they kind of go through the whole thing, and they're like, yeah, probably less than 5%. And I said, okay, and how many of those people make every patient go through that? And they said, well, probably none, because they only use them if they find some sort of indication of an issue. And at that point, it said, okay, well, that's part of your experience, is that you have to be able to communicate the value. And I love what you're saying, is that, and help really position it as really good for the patient and a really big deal.
That's a great example of elevating what could be a very routine process to something that this is what makes us special.
Yeah, and I think you talk a little bit about wow moments in general, as part of your lectures. And I think certain cases, when you can create those the feeling of, oh, this isn't like everybody else, that automatically is good ingredients for wow, right?
Yeah. Well, a great thing for people to say, this is when you really have differentiated yourself, is when a patient says, why can't everybody do it like you do? Why can't every organization treat me like you do? That means you are doing it right. But with the wow moments, sometimes when I talk about wows, I have to use a little bit of a disclaimer, because usually, when you say wow, people are thinking, oh, these big, grandiose wow, where somebody's in the waiting room and we give them a foot massage while they're waiting, we use these crazy examples, when in reality, it's the little things. It's like the example you used of the technician, just saying, here's why we use all the machines, because we want to make sure we have a complete picture of your unique situation. The receptionist using your name, the warm greeting. Those aren't big things. Taken all by themselves, they're not necessarily big things, but those things add up. You go through a whole process with an office, and at each step, there is just those little moments you walk out of there thinking that was a really good experience,
Hmm.
and that's the idea.
So what are some examples of wow moments you guys had at Disney?
Yeah, well, one of the things they used to ask us to do is if you saw a guest getting ready to take a photo of their family, because every family, I don't know if this is you, but in my family, it's me. Every family has their designated photographer, that doesn't show up in any of the family, or they're like this, half their face in the frame. Um, so they said, if you can, now you couldn't do it every time, but if you can, go over and say, hey, could I take the picture for you so that you can be in the photo as well? That's just a little thing, but it was a moment. It was a moment of wow. And when you're showing somebody the photo, somebody may say, "Who took that picture for you?" "Oh, I was one of the people who works there. It was great. He was great." Um, One of the great things, I've got a young granddaughter now, and the Disney princess thing is huge. And these little girls, they'll dress up in their favorite princess outfit, whether it's Jasmine, Cinderella, whatever. The cast members will call them by their princess name.
Mm.
When they come into the park. "Oh, Cinderella, I can't believe you're here today. That's great." And those little moments didn't take anything away from what they were doing at the time, didn't cost a penny, but it created that little moment of wow.
Yeah.
So those were the things that I just love. Somebody would spill an ice cream cone. A child spills the ice cream cone. Crying, go over to them, say, "I saw what happened. Let me get you a fresh ice cream cone," and bring it to them. No extra charge. Disney's going to be okay. There's no extra charge. And went from tears to a smile. It was a little moment of wow.
Yeah, and it's almost like the key ingredient to the wows that you describe is the unexpected element of it. I'm
Yeah,
not entitled to this. I'm not, I'm expecting a good eye exam, but I
right.
might not be expecting something else that goes along with the whole experience.
And a lot of that just comes from experience too. That's what they've experienced in the past. That it was just very transactional.
Hmm.
So I believe people truly, and it may not be always a conscious noticing, but I believe people really do notice those things. And they can't say exactly what it was, but it just felt different.
Hmm.
The whole thing felt different.
Well, and
And
I think
I'm
we're
sure,
emotional. We're emotional as I mean, we're emotional animals. We try to rationalize our emotions with logic in so many different ways, but how we feel about something oftentimes dictates exactly how we respond. So
right.
creating that feeling is on a much more subconscious level.
And it trumps price. That price will always come into play, certainly, but people are willing to pay extra to go a little out of their way
Hmm.
if they know it's going to be a great experience. And the other thing about wows that I want to stress, it's not about always getting better and better and better with every interaction that you have with a particular patient. It's when the patient knows it's going to be an excellent experience because of what they've experienced with you in the past.
Hmm.
So there's a restaurant nearby that I love that my wife and I go there all the time. It's not better every time we go. It's great every time we go.
Hmm.
And I know it. So when we have friends in town, we always take them to that restaurant because we're confident it's going to be a great experience.
So
So it's
consistency sounds like you keep to this.
consistency at the basics, consistency at the things that, we should give people a friendly greeting. We should explain to them what we're doing, right? We should escort them to the exam room. We should, offer them a cup of coffee if they're waiting too long. So it's being consistently great at those basic things.
Yeah, well, and I will come back to how do you sustain some of these things, but let's go
Right.
back to building a great experience. What
Mhm.
else, what other advice would you give to our listeners and viewers?
Well, I talked about the task versus experience mentality. And one of the ways to do that is to literally, and you can even do this physically, start outside of the office and let's walk through the process of how a patient experiences our office. And what can we do at each of those steps to elevate it from a task to a positive experience? You know, so in other words, what would be a mediocre experience and what would be an excellent experience at each of these touch points along the way? So again, you're getting your people involved, and people don't argue with their own data, as I said before. So get them involved in that. Another thing that I think is important, an important part of the experience is the environment itself. There's a term that you may remember from the presentation that I did that you were there, a concept I call everything speaks.
Yeah.
That every detail either enhances your practice's brand or it detracts from the brand. From the appearance of the waiting room to the tone of voice of the receptionist. It's either building the experience or it's, diminishing the experience. So, the idea that I use is everything speaks. So imagine you go you're in a waiting room and there's out of date, ratty magazines, on the table there. If everything speaks, what would that say to a patient? To me, it would say, well, these are old magazines, they're out of date. Is the equipment out of date? Is the optometrist up to date on the latest advances? Now that's a leap, I know, but logic has nothing to do,
right,
with
it's just
with
the feeling
what people
you
are
get.
thinking. It's the feeling you get. So going through the whole thing from an everything speaks mentality, that light bulb's been burned out for 2 years now that I'm looking at it. That handwritten sign at the reception desk saying, no personal checks or whatever it may be. What is that handwritten sign saying? This was an afterthought. When I'm dealing with my optometrist, I don't want things to be an afterthought. So you look at it with different eyes, so that the creative moments of wow, of the, what would be a task versus experience mentality, and then what are the details saying? Because they're saying something.
Well, are you, so I love that, by the way, the everything speaks, because there's no neutral, right? There's nothing that is neutral. It's either, I love the kind of the bipolar nature of that statement. It's either adding or detracting from the experience. There's nothing neutral. And so you almost have to question, is this adding or is this detracting?
That's actually a good way to position it. That's a really good way to position it. And again, if you can get people thinking that way, then that's where the magic is. So one of the things, you want everything to align with your brand. When I think about an optometry office, I'm thinking about attention to detail, precision, my appearance, because, I'm buying some glasses, I'm getting some frames, I'm thinking about, pretty specific things. Anything that's out of alignment with that is a disconnect. So at Disney, you think about the magic that they're trying to create. A disconnect would be if there's trash everywhere, right? I mean, that would take away, but think about the reality of that place. It generates a mind-boggling amount of trash. Well, that's a reality. So one of the things that's expected as a cast member, they call their employees their cast members.
I love that, by the way.
Yeah, I know.
Explain that a little bit more.
Yeah. So the idea of cast member is your job is bigger than the tasks. You're part of a show. So that's why they use the term cast members. You're part of a show. Your task may be to sweep the streets, or to run this attraction, but your job is to be part of the show. So that's it. It elevates the importance of every role there. So everybody's a cast member. Everybody there is a cast member. So with that in mind too, of why you're a cast member and how important the show is, one of the non-negotiables is if you're walking through the park and you see a piece of trash on the ground, it's your job to go over and pick it up and throw it away. It's expected. It's non-negotiable because people expect the park to be clean. And so it's just built into this is part of the expectation. And it doesn't matter if you're working at 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, the submarine ride, or if you're vice president of marketing, it's your job to pick it up and throw it away. And interestingly, what do you think the number one compliment Disney World gets is?
It's so clean.
Is so clean. Number one compliment. Consistently, the number one compliment is how clean the place is. Yeah. Well, that's why. That's why. They know how important that is, and they engage everybody in doing it.
That's really interesting. And, you touch on this briefly, and I don't want it to necessarily get lost in the conversation. It's creating the journey from your patient's perspective.
Right.
requires you to physically walk in their shoes. And I actually love that
Right.
because in my head, I've done so many interviews with doctors as part of our work at National Strategic. Every single time we onboard a client, we talk
Hmm.
to them and we have them walk us through in their mind through the experience that their patients have. And I think there's this idea of my perceived experience.
Right.
And then there's this idea like what I want it to be. And then there's
Hmm.
this idea of what actually happens. And
Right.
so it's almost like how much more effective could you be at creating at doing everything you're saying, Dennis, if you really took a critical eye and you said, you know
Right.
what, I'm not going to see patients, or I'm not going to work at the front desk, or I'm not going to do whatever. And everybody just literally gets together during the staff meeting and they literally walk through every single step
Right.
and ask themselves those three questions that you kind of brought up, which is if we're doing this with are we doing this with a task mentality or an experience mentality?
Right.
And then where are we creating these moments of wow?
Right. And if everything speaks, what are the details saying
Exactly.
at each
Exactly.
element? And the magic is in those discussions, because a lot of times, like what you were saying, we think this is what's happening, but we don't really know
Right.
what's happening. And so to take the time to come together as a team and have this kind of dialogue and to stress the importance of these are the things that elevate us. And quite frankly, these are the things that make our jobs exciting. When we do these things well, our jobs are better. From my perspective, I know I enjoy what I do much more when I know I'm giving great service than if I was just, going through the motions. And so, those just gatherings of your team to focus in on these things says a lot.
Well, and that's where I wanted to go next, because in all reality at Disney, I think what you've described, and I was thinking about this when you were talking about the cast component, is that when I'm a cast member in a show,
Mhm.
there is an understanding of what the finished product looks like.
Right.
Right. And I think that's such a critical part to knowing that you're really there for the finished product, not just
Mhm.
for, not just the role that you're
Mhm.
expected to play in that particular show. So carrying that analogy, I mean, what do we tell our staff? How do we get our staff on board with seeing that bigger vision of what we're actually doing?
Yeah. Well, I think it starts with just having those discussions, because now you're putting it all on their radar screen. So just doing that, you've done more than most organizations will ever do around service. So just having those discussions. But let's take these ideas that we've been talking about of looking through the lens of the patient,
Mhm.
step by step. Um, where can we create those little moments of wow, wherever we can, and this idea of everything speaks. Let's just
Mhm.
take those three things as foundational. So now you weave those into everything that impacts your team members. So how do we hire people?
Mhm.
How do we hire? And we can go into that. How do we hire people that are wired to do this? How do we train? How do we onboard new people to introduce these things to them so that they realize right away this is our culture. This is what we're all about. How do we reinforce it throughout their career? And how do we hold people accountable for it? So you're just taking these three, pretty basic concepts, but then you're looking at the pretty basic employee relations elements and you're plugging those into those things. So it's easier said than done. But that's the idea is that's how you move it from being an initiative in an office to
Mhm.
being part of your office's culture.
Well, so get into the hiring for me a little bit, because you said, people who are wired to do this stuff.
Hmm.
And I know that hiring is always a challenge in
Yeah.
almost any business. And I feel like optometry has been hit extra hard.
Hmm.
What's Disney do to get all those happy people to come work for them?
Well, they're always in recruitment mode. So they're always looking for great people in a variety of roles. So it could be a front desk person at a hotel. So I'm out and I'm having dinner somewhere and I have a server who's just fantastic, from start to finish. They have what they call casting scout cards that I could give that server a casting scout. So I think you would be fabulous at Disney. Take this to the, if you're ever looking for a position, take this to the casting center at Disney. My name is on it. You'll get an interview right away. So one of the things is just to be always on the lookout for good people. In your world, certainly that type for reception areas, but for technicians, relationships with schools, relationships with other operations that have similar types of roles in them, to have contacts. Who are your best of the best? Another thing that I think is definitely worthwhile doing is, who are our current superstars in those roles? And why are they superstars? What are the things that they do that make them superstars in terms of patient relations? And then use those as a foundation for creating some of your interview questions, so that because then you sit down and you talk with that person and say, how do you look at teamwork? How do you look at the patient experience? And you hear what they say. And again, you use some of that information to craft the interview questions that you're going to use. So, because you're looking for people who, kind of have some of the same approaches. Another thing that Disney does, and I recommend to any organization, is treat your your job applicants the way you want them to treat the patients. So when you think about the hiring process, let's look at through the lens of the applicant. Let's make sure everything reflects the culture of our practice, along the way, because everything speaks. And how can we create a little moment of wow? So they even during the interview process, they're seeing, okay, this is how it works. And so what you're doing is you're starting the training process with the interviewing process.
It's interesting on that front. One of we probably should tell more clients about it, but one of the pieces of feedback that I'd gotten from a client just recently, he said, we don't have a hiring problem anymore because your one strategy worked. And I said, well, which strategy is that? He's like, well, a year ago, you told me to make a genuine video featuring some of our staff who really like working here and having them talk about what their favorite thing is about working here. So we made a short video. It was completely like cell phone recorded, right?
Yeah.
Like professionally
doesn't have to be hired. It doesn't have to be a Hollywood recording.
Right. And we sent it to some of our applicants. And what we found was that some people wouldn't return our calls anymore. And, because they didn't want to work with us. And that's fine. They probably wouldn't have been a great fit anyway.
Yeah.
Just trying to pull some wool over their eyes if we're bringing them onto a team that they don't want to be part of. But the people that we ended up hiring are such a good fit that we're operating more efficiently. We don't need to hire more people. No one's complaining about being understaffed. But it's really, I just realized as you were saying it, that probably was a big moment of wow to get a video during an interview process in your inbox to say, this is who we are. Please watch this so that you have a good sense of what we're trying to accomplish.
And let's face it, most interview processes are awful, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I remember going through interviews and, before I worked at Disney, and, you're uncomfortable, you're nervous, all of those things. When you can turn that typical interview process on its head, you become a beacon of light to potential, employees in your operation. And just to support what you're saying, that's one of the things that if you go to the casting center at Disney World, the first thing you do after being greeted and all of those things is you go in and you watch a video doing what you just talked about, talking about this is what it means to work here. And what they found is about 15% of the people screen themselves out before even going through the interview process. But modeling your culture during the interview is just a great way to start someone's career. They're going to remember that forever. Whichever way that interview process goes, they're going to remember it forever. So let's make sure it's a fond memory of the way you did it.
Yeah, I love that. And I think the interesting part is that, getting the right people on board is also a key component to having strong employee loyalty, right?
Right.
So what else do you recommend from a, kind of linking that patient experience to having great team members who are able to deliver that experience and do it in a consistent way?
Well, after you've hired someone, another key part of their career that they will remember forever is the onboarding process, that first day of actual work, when they come in and they're actually starting. onboarding is the bridge between hiring and actually doing your job.
Right.
So however long that is, it's a moment frozen in time. So what we did, and what I recommend to organizations, is use that time not to focus in on here's the paperwork to sign, here's the the releases, here's the drug test, here's all the those are important. Yes, we do need to do those things, but let's use the time to talk about who we are, and saying, okay, this is what makes our practice different. This is why we expect these things of anybody who works here. This is why we expect when you come in to open up the office that you're making sure that everything looks good because of this. And this is how we do it. So you're linking that culture that you want to that onboarding process.
Mm-hmm.
And so I always have a formal onboarding process, not just put somebody, tag them together with somebody, to learn the ropes. Yes, you're going to do that. But before that, something that really connects them to the culture of your practice and why you do what you do and why their role is important. And I'm going to take a sideline here just for a second that I just thought of. One of the managers at one of the Disney restaurants did this. They were hiring a dishwasher for the restaurant. Mm-hmm. And what he would do was he would arrange to have a nice lunch with the applicant. And, somebody they were pretty sure they were going to hire them, and they would arrange a nice lunch, nice food, and so forth. But on the plates and on the silverware, there would be, crusty things. There would be, lipstick stains on the glass, and they would just wait until, you could tell the applicant was a little, taken aback. Say, this is how important your job is. So we could have the best food in the world, but if those plates aren't clean, that silverware isn't spotless, those glasses aren't spotless, it's not worth anything.
Oh, I love that.
And yeah, I do too. And then they would have a nice meal, with clean silverware and everything.
I was going to say, do they have to eat
they did. Yeah, they did.
Or no?
But imagine the power of that, because now as a dishwasher, in your heart, how important the job is. So to me, effective training engages the heart. And so that's the thing to be looking for. How, in that training moment, however long that is, how do we engage the heart of the person? So at Disney, you go through a program called Traditions. Now, there happens to be a 2-day program, okay? But it varies depending on the organization. At Disney, it happens to be 2 days, but it's all about the culture. This is where we came from. Most kids today joining Disney, they don't know who Walt Disney was. Walt Disney it's a park, it's a movie company. Mm-hmm. So they talk about the legacy, and this is the legacy you're carrying on. These are the things that are expected as a cast member and here's why we do those things. So now when you go for your on-the-job training, for the specific role, those on-the-job trainers are trained on how to make that connection from the onboarding process to the specifics of the job. So it's all a seamless time from the interview to now I'm actually doing my job. Mm-hmm. And then you go further, being relentless in keeping that message in front of people. Those team meetings that I talked about, I think a great way to start a team meeting, and I think we should have team meetings at least once a week, even if it's a 10-minute meeting. Yep. At least once a week. Somebody share a wow story. Somebody share something that you did or that you saw another team member do that created a moment of wow. It's a great way to start a meeting off in a positive way. But what it's doing is it's continuing on that process of keeping the message in front of people.
It's reinforcing it, yeah.
Reinforcing it. Reinforcing it. And then another thing that's not a lot of fun to talk about, but is what do you do if somebody's not living up to the standards? Right. That's where accountability comes into play. And this is a hard one for leaders, but we have to hold people accountable. Mm-hmm. The example that I'm sure I used at the program you were at was, imagine you come into Disney World, your child runs up to Cinderella. She turns around, tugs on Cinderella's dress. She turns around, has a cigarette in one hand, a cup of coffee in the other hand, says, kid, I'm on break. There would be years of therapy involved. Everything would collapse. Everything would collapse at that moment. But it's a disconnect, and so you can't let that go. You can never let the smoking Cinderella behaviors go.
Mm-hmm.
So as leaders, we have to be coaches. Coaching is, you think about it, if a smoking Cinderella behavior occurs, somebody's short with a patient, whatever, that smoking Cinderella behavior occurs, and you address it as close to that circumstance as you can, that's real-time training.
Mm-hmm.
Training it doesn't get any better than that. That's real-time training. So, and then also what's part of accountability is catching people doing things right.
Mm-hmm.
You see or hear somebody do something, that's a really good showcase of our culture here to say, I saw how you did that. I saw how you handled that situation, or I heard how you handled it. That was wonderful. Thank you so much. You are locking in that behavior because you're reinforcing it, in this way, in a positive way. And then the umbrella that I would put over all of it, in terms of keeping it going, is as leaders, we have to be the models. People need to be able to look to us and say, yeah, that person believes in every fiber of their being that the patient experience is critical. They watch what we do, they listen to what we say, they hear how we talk about patients, all of those things. They see us walk by that Coke cup sitting on the counter. So we need to be models of what we expect our people to be. There's a great photo. I wish I could show this photo, but there's a wonderful photo of Walt Disney at Disneyland back in the 1950s. Somebody captured this photo of him, and he was picking up a popcorn box that somebody had thrown on the ground. And I thought, that's just, if Walt Disney is picking up that piece of trash, I can pick up that piece of trash.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because I actually have that photo pulled up.
Oh, do you? Great.
As you said it, I looked it up, so I'm gonna put it on the screen.
Yeah, if you could share the screen, that would be great.
Encourage more of the folks who are part of the part of the video experience, because I know we're on audio as well. So I'll throw it on the screen here in a second. While you're talking, though, because I want to ask the one question. You mentioned the smoking Cinderella story, and I do think it's important to find your smoking Cinderellas. What specifically, if you haven't done this before, what specifically are you looking for? Is if you're
there it is. Yep.
Yep. There.
Oh, that's one of my blog posts. Yeah. Yeah, that's the picture right there.
Yeah, and
that's Walt picking up trash at Disneyland. This was probably taken around 1959, somewhere around there. And he was in Disney, and he regularly walked the park at Disneyland, usually early in the morning before it got crowded, because so many people would recognize him, that he wanted to really kind of walk around and make sure everything was looking good. And that was a picture of him literally picking up trash. And I like to think of that as, somebody's got a new hire with them, and they just said, it's important for us all to pick up trash. They turn around and there's Walt, picking up trash. Now, I don't know if that actually happened or not, but that's the way I like to think about that particular photo.
And that's awesome. So kind of the part of the moral of the story is, kind of live the values that you're expecting people to do. And then at the same time, back to the smoking Cinderella. I love that as a very vibrant image in somebody's mind. Is like, don't be the smoking Cinderella. Don't be, and identify your smoking Cinderellas and realize how awful they are for your business, and either coach them out, or help them get better.
And yeah, sometimes you do have to ask somebody to leave, believe it or not, Disney is a unionized organization. So before you can fire somebody, there's a specific step-by-step process that you have to go through. And because of the hiring and training processes, it's not that common that they end up having to fire somebody, but it does happen. But you have to. The brand is too important to hold on a smoking Cinderella, but that's unsalvageable. And we know they exist out there. And usually companies wait far too long to do what they know they need to do. And so the best thing you can do really for the organization and for the person is say, this is not the job for you, and part ways. But from a coaching standpoint, it's identifying what those behaviors are. These are the things that are important to us as an organization. This is what we are committing to doing. And if somebody's not doing those things, to coach them through it. Never let the coaching moment go. As I said, coach them through it. Recognize when people are doing things well. If it continues on that somebody's not doing things, coach them again. Coach to the point where they know you're serious about this. And then if need be, then you part ways. But I find if we set it up properly, we coach properly, that 90% of the time, you're going to get this person aligned.
Yeah. And, I think the other part I remember you talking about is kind of this concept of backstage versus onstage, right? And the idea that a lot of these performance issues, even if somebody's frustrated, even because nobody's going to have an issue if the office is slow and if they only have one patient to see, whatever. The people who end up kind of causing some of these experience issues are probably frustrated. They're overwhelmed. They might feel undermanned and under-supported, whatever, and they snap. And so talk a little bit about this, about on stage for me.
Yeah, when you're on stage, the show is on. All the things that we've been talking about. So you don't complain about Bob called in sick today, or we've lost 2 people this week. That may absolutely be true, those things, but you don't air your dirty laundry in public, right? So you think about a play and somebody misses a cue, somebody misses a line. You don't stop the play and say, "Oh, you missed the line," and let's start over again. You take care of that backstage. Take care of those things backstage. And that's where professionalism comes into play, because as a professional, you maintain the dignity of the operation. You can say, "Oh man, yeah, we're really busy today. Just bear with me. We're gonna make this happen. Just bear with me." But you don't say, "Yeah, we had call-ins," or they never give us enough staff on Mondays, or whatever it may be, because that's backstage. And again, if you talk that very subject with the team and say, "What's onstage behavior? What's backstage behavior?" They will tell you exactly what it is. So we know, we just don't often think about it. And so a lot of this is just getting people thinking about these things. There's an old saying that you've heard before, the customer is always right. Well, anybody who's ever been in business knows that is not true, right? I mean, the customer, the patient is not always right. Sometimes they are wrong. The philosophy at Disney for many years was that they call their customers guests. The guests may not always be right, but they should always be our guest. And that was a good mindset, but a friend of mine changed it, and it's really taken hold. And this is what I would suggest to your practices. The patient may not always be right, but let's allow them to be wrong with dignity. And I love that. For us, it was the guest may not always right, but let's allow the guest to be wrong with dignity. And so those times when you just want to say, what you're thinking in your mind about somebody who's doing something or saying something they shouldn't be. How do I get them to where we need them to be and sustain their dignity through this? Versus, what a lot of people do is they just turn their back on them or say you're wrong.
Well, it's a naturally empathetic approach, which is a really kind of a big part of everything that you've been advocating for in this conversation is, you got to look at the patient journey from the eyes of the patient. You have to look at how this makes them feel. And even if they're wrong, how do you let them maintain their dignity? How do you get them there from their perspective? They're still, they're still okay.
Yeah. And I'm not talking about the abusive patient, certainly. Okay, that's a whole that's much more rare than people like to think it. Those are the stories we love to tell, but they don't happen as often as we like to think they do. But those ones, they're just wrong or they're upset. That's where the professionalism comes into play. That's what we're paid to do at the end of the day, as well as at the beginning of the day. Because sometimes you've been working all day. That patient comes in, the show is on for that patient that's coming in at 4 o'clock or whatever time it may be.
Yeah. So Dennis, this has been a great conversation. I think we've talked a lot about this, patient experience. And I want to just hammer home as maybe a final point, and maybe you can elevate this a little bit, as this concept of, we have patients who walk in the door. They may be expecting one thing. We're trying to exceed those expectations
Mhm.
for sure. And that's the one thing that's going to allow us to compete on service rather than price, rather
Right.
than scale, or rather than cost. I mean, the truth is that competing on service is truly an art. And it's an
Mhm.
art of this kind of, if I'm summarizing a lot of this conversation, it's an art of being able to see the world through the eyes of your patient, and also
Mhm.
knowing the experience that you're trying to create.
Right.
And with that in mind, any final thoughts on this concept of competing on service?
Yeah. The I think, again, putting it all together is you want to create a seamless, consistently great experience. I guess that's the way I would say it. That you want it to be seamless. You want it to be easy. You think about what you really want from an organization. I want them to do the job right.
Hmm.
I want them to be easy to work with, and I want them to be nice to me. You think about it, that's really what you want, right? They do what they said they were going to do. They do it right. So you go to an optometry office, I expect the exam to be done correctly, my glasses to do what they're supposed to do, my contacts, whatever it is. I want it to be easy, making an appointment, arriving, going through the exam. I want it to be, easy, and be nice to me along the way.
Yeah,
That's really what I hate
love
to
that.
oversimplify. My whole career, I guess, is built on that, but I hate to oversimplify it. But that's really it,
That's
is
great.
those three things.
And for people who want to learn more, talk a little bit about your book before we wrap up.
Yeah. So my book is called Lessons from the Mouse. And it's based on my Disney experiences. It's 10 lessons, kind of what we've been talking about here. 10 different lessons. Never let backstage come on stage. Little moments of wow add up. Those kinds of things. And it's got chapter end questions that people can use for in team meetings and those kinds of things. We've got videos. I've got an online program. If they go to my website, they could actually just put in Google Dennis Snow, and they'll find my website. But my website is snowassociates.com,
Mhm.
snowassociates.com. But if they just Google my name, they'll get to my website, and everything is there. We use that we try to make it seamless. Everything is,
That's
is,
great.
is
Yeah,
right there that you
taking
can connect to.
taking a
Yeah,
piece of your own advice.
that's right. I have to remind myself now and then.
Yeah, that's awesome conversation, Dennis. Thank you so much for
My
joining us today
pleasure.
on the Power Hour. Really enjoyed your insights, and look forward to future conversations.
I hope it was helpful for everyone.
Absolutely. Thank you. If you're enjoying the Power Hour, you might be asking yourself, what can I do today in my practice that's going to make an impact? So over the years, the practice coaches and consultants at the Power Practice have helped thousands of practices improve. And they often start with one thing, and that's a proprietary methodology called the Practice Profitability Audit. For about $2,400, they look at all of your practice numbers and they stack them up against where a practice of your size could and should be. It takes about a week for them to do. And because they're so experienced, they know what your potential looks like. And they're often able to take that $2,400, multiply it several times over, and hand it right back to you in found profits in your practice in months, not years, in months. But you get to keep the much more profitable practice for years afterwards. But here's the best news. I'm going to tell you how you can have the practice profitability audit completely free. See, we're really trying to get people onto the show website, which is, by the way, powerpractice.com. And then you click the Power Hour podcast button. The reason we want you there is because I want the audience participation. I want to hear your feedback, and I want to know how to make the show better for you. So you can interact with us, send us your feedback, offer your suggestions. And for a limited time, when you go there, you can also request a practice profitability audit for free. Right. We're going to cover 100% of the cost, but only for 5 people per month. And 5 people per month is all we really have capacity for, because this is a resource intensive audit, and the Power Practice coaches are generally busy serving their clients. But for 5 people a month, they've agreed to cover 100% of the cost. So it's totally free to you. So again, take action immediately in your practice. Go to powerpractice.com, click on the Power Hour podcast, interact with us, but also request a practice profitability audit today.